2 years. That was all that stood between me and complete freedom. 2 years to maintain the appearance of a marriage that was never real, honor a contract that saved a life, and finally take full possession of Richardson Industries. It seemed simple enough when I signed those papers 6 months ago, until I began questioning whether I truly understood what I had purchased. My name is Robert Richardson. I'm 38 years old, and I'm a man who has always known exactly what he wanted. I inherited half of Richardson Industries when my father died, but the will's clauses were clear. To assume total control of the company, I needed to be married and demonstrate family stability for at least 2 years. My father believed married men made more responsible decisions, an archaic philosophy, but one worth $2.3 billion. I could have married for love, could have courted some well-bred heiress, someone from my social circle who understood the rules of the game. But love always seemed like an unnecessary variable in business decisions. Efficiency was what mattered. That's why, when I learned that Charlotte Davis, a nurse at Mount Sinai Hospital, desperately needed $500,000 to pay for her mother's experimental cancer treatment, I saw the perfect opportunity. Charlotte was 24 years old. With blonde hair she always pulled back in a practical bun, green eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the world, and a quiet determination that anyone could notice from miles away. She worked 3 shifts a week to pay basic medical bills, but the treatment that could save her mother's life was completely beyond her financial reach. My proposal was direct and businesslike, $500,000 in exchange for 2 years of marriage. No love, no romantic expectations, just a mutually beneficial transaction. She would have the money to save her mother. I would have a wife to satisfy the will's terms. Simple, clean, efficient. What I didn't expect was how difficult it would be to live with someone I had essentially bought. In the first 6 months, we established a routine that worked well for both of us. Charlotte kept the master bedroom of the mansion. I insisted on that, since she was technically the lady of the house. I stayed in the guest suite upstairs. She handled her responsibilities as a wife at social events, appearing by my side at charity dinners and business meetings when necessary. I transferred a generous monthly amount to her account, ensuring she would never have to worry about money again. It was a civilized arrangement, cordial, completely without emotional complications, until that Tuesday morning when everything changed. I was in my home office reviewing quarterly reports when I heard voices by the pool area. Charlotte was talking to someone, and there was something in her tone, a lightness, a genuine laugh, that made me look out the window. My brother Peterson was crouched beside her in the garden, both examining the plants Charlotte had begun caring for a few weeks earlier. Peterson is a doctor 3 years younger than me, and he's always been the more charismatic, warmer brother. Where I built walls, he built bridges. Where I saw numbers, he saw people. And in that moment, seeing him whisper something that made Charlotte laugh in a way she had never laughed for me, I felt something completely unexpected, a tightness in my chest that I couldn't identify. "Good morning, Charlotte," I heard Peterson say, and there was a tenderness in his voice that made me realize something devastating. In 6 months of marriage, I had never greeted my wife with any kind of affection. Our interactions were always practical, always related to the business of our shared life. I watched as Peterson helped Charlotte water the flowers that were wilting. She had transformed a neglected part of the garden into a small paradise of colors, but I had never noticed, never asked about it, never shown interest in anything she did, as long as it didn't interfere with my routine. "You have magic hands," Peterson said, observing the roses that seemed to have revived under her care. "These plants were practically dead when you arrived here." "They just needed attention," Charlotte replied, and there was a melancholy in her voice that made me wonder if she was talking only about plants. "Sometimes things seem lost when they're really just being neglected." Peterson stopped watering and looked directly at her. "Charlotte, I need to tell you something." My breathing stopped. There was something in his posture, in the intensity of his gaze, that made me understand exactly what was happening before he said the words. "I know you're married to my brother," he continued, "and I know I have no right to feel this. But I've fallen in love with you." The silence that followed seemed to last an eternity. Charlotte dropped the watering can, her hands trembling slightly. "Peterson," she began, but he interrupted her. "I don't expect anything from you. I know you're fulfilling an agreement with Robert, that you have your reasons for this marriage. But I needed you to know that someone sees you. Someone notices how you care for things with such tenderness, how you transform everything around you into something more beautiful. Someone realizes you have the kindest heart I've ever known." It was at that moment that the truth hit me like a punch to the stomach. In 6 months, I had never really looked at Charlotte. I had seen a convenient wife, a solution to a problem, a necessary piece in my corporate puzzle. But Peterson was seeing a woman, an extraordinary woman who transformed dying plants into gardens, who brought life to neglected spaces, who deserved much more than the polite indifference I had offered. And for the first time since we signed that contract, I wondered, what kind of man had I become? Charlotte finally responded, her voice almost a whisper. "Peterson, you're a wonderful man. Any woman would be lucky to have your love. But I can't. We can't." "I know," he said, stepping closer. "But Charlotte, I also know you're not happy. I see it in your eyes. My brother can give you financial security, a comfortable life. But he doesn't give you what you really deserve." "And what do I deserve?" she asked, and there was a vulnerability in her voice that made me realize that perhaps she herself didn't know the answer. "You deserve to be truly loved. You deserve someone who notices when you're sad, who asks about your dreams, who greets you every morning like seeing you is the best part of his day." I stepped away from the window, feeling as if I had been exposed to a truth I wasn't prepared to face. For 6 months, I had prided myself on the efficiency of our arrangement. No emotional complications, no unrealistic expectations, just 2 adults honoring a mutually beneficial agreement. But watching Peterson declare his love for my wife, noticing how Charlotte's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of gratitude for finally being seen, I understood that perhaps efficiency wasn't everything. Perhaps I had been a fool. That night, during our usual silent dinner, I observed Charlotte in a completely different way. I noticed how she cut her food into small pieces, how she bit her lower lip when she was thoughtful, how her eyes lit up slightly when she talked about her mother's treatment progress. "How are the plants in the garden?" I asked suddenly, surprising us both. Charlotte stopped eating, looking at me with genuine surprise. "The plants? You've been working in the garden. I wonder how it's going." Well, they're recovering. Some still need extra care, but most are responding well to attention." She paused, studying my face. "You've never asked about the garden before." Perhaps I should have asked. Something changed in her expression. A cautious curiosity, as if she were trying to decipher a puzzle. "Robert, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you really marry me? And don't give me the answer about your father's will. I mean, why did you choose this way to fulfill the terms? You could have married anyone." The question caught me off guard. I had rehearsed the practical answer so many times that I almost recited it automatically. But something in the way she looked at me, really looked at me, the same way Peterson had looked at her in the garden, made me hesitate. "Because I thought it would be simpler," I finally admitted. "No emotional expectations. No risk of complications. And has it been? Simple?" I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time saw not just the convenient wife I had hired, but the woman who had saved dying plants, who worked tirelessly to save her mother's life, who transformed everything around her with a kindness I had completely ignored. "No," I answered honestly. "It hasn't been simple." That night, lying in my solitary suite, I thought about Peterson and his words in the garden. I thought about Charlotte and how she had looked when someone finally truly saw her. And I thought about myself, a 38-year-old man who had been so focused on protecting his heart that he had completely forgotten how to use it. 18 months. That's how much time remained on our matrimonial contract. 18 months to discover if I could learn to see the extraordinary woman who had been by my side all along. Because one thing had become clear. I wasn't willing to lose her to my brother. Not without a fight. Not without trying to deserve the love Peterson offered so easily. For the first time in my adult life, Robert Richardson had a goal that didn't involve spreadsheets, reports, or corporate strategies. I wanted to win my own wife's heart. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in 6 months of marriage. I woke up early and went to the kitchen before Charlotte. I found myself standing in front of the coffee machine at 6:30 a.m., trying to remember how she liked her coffee. The realization that I didn't know hit me like a cold slap. I was her husband, on paper at least, and I didn't even know if she preferred cream or sugar. Robert. Charlotte's voice behind me was filled with surprise. She stood in the doorway wearing a simple blue robe, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders. For the first time, I really noticed how beautiful she was in the morning light filtering through the kitchen windows. "Good morning," I said, and the words felt strange on my tongue. When was the last time I had actually said good morning to her? "I thought I'd make coffee." She approached cautiously, as if I were a wild animal that might bolt at any moment. "That's very thoughtful. But you don't usually—" "I know." I turned to face her fully. "Charlotte, how do you like your coffee?" The question seemed to surprise her, more than finding me in the kitchen. Cream and 1 sugar. Why?" "Because I should know that." I began preparing 2 cups, aware of her eyes following my every movement. "I should know a lot of things about you that I don't." "Robert, are you feeling all right? You seem different." I handed her the cup, our fingers brushing for just a moment. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through me. When had I last touched my wife, even accidentally? "I'm feeling like I've been an idiot," I admitted. Charlotte nearly choked on her coffee. "Excuse me. Yesterday, when I saw—" I paused, not sure how to explain without revealing that I'd been spying on her conversation with Peterson. "I realize that I've been treating you like a business associate instead of my wife." But that's what I am, isn't it? A business associate." Her voice was quiet, but there was something underneath it. Hurt, perhaps, or disappointment. "Is that what you want to be?" The question hung between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we should cross. Charlotte set down her cup, studying my face with those green eyes that seemed to see everything. "What I want doesn't really matter, does it? We have a contract. 18 months left, and then we both get what we originally agreed to. And what if I don't want to wait 18 months to get to know my wife?" Charlotte's breath caught. "Robert, what's gotten into you?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text message. My assistant, Scarlett Thompson, was already bombarding me with updates about the day's meetings. I glanced at the screen and made a decision that surprised even me. "Cancel my 9 o'clock meeting," I typed back. "Cancel it?" Charlotte had read over my shoulder. "Don't you have the Henderson Industries merger review today?" I stared at her. "You know about my meetings?" Yes, I pay attention." A flush crept up her neck. "I know it's not my business, but I like to know what's important to you." Something twisted in my chest. She had been paying attention to my life while I had been completely oblivious to hers. "The Henderson merger can wait," I said, turning off my phone completely. "Would you like to have breakfast with me? Actually, have breakfast, not just sit in the same room while we both check our phones." "I don't understand what's happening here." "Neither do I admitted. "But I'd like to figure it out. With you." An hour later, we sat across from each other at the small table in the breakfast nook, a space I'd never used before, preferring to eat standing up in the kitchen or skip breakfast entirely. Charlotte had made eggs Benedict from scratch, and I found myself wondering what other hidden talents she had. "Tell me about your mother," I said, cutting into my eggs. Charlotte looked up, surprised. "My mother? You've never really told me about her. I know she's sick. I know the treatment is working, but I don't know who she is, what she's like." For a moment, Charlotte just stared at me. Then, slowly, her face lit up with a smile I'd never seen before. Warm, genuine, beautiful. "She's incredible," Charlotte began. And for the next 30 minutes, she told me about Margaret Davis, a retired teacher who had raised Charlotte alone after her father left when she was 5, who had taught her about plants and gardening, who still sent care packages filled with homemade cookies, even though Charlotte was an adult living in a mansion. "She sounds wonderful," I said when she finished. "She is. She's everything I want to be. Strong, kind, selfless." Charlotte's smile faltered slightly. "She doesn't know the truth about our marriage. I told her we fell in love quickly and decided not to wait. I couldn't bear to tell her I essentially sold myself to save her life." "You didn't sell yourself, Charlotte. You made a sacrifice out of love. What's the difference?" "The difference," I said, reaching across the table to touch her hand, "is that what you did was beautiful. What I did was take advantage of your desperation." She didn't pull her hand away. "You saved her life, Robert. Whatever your motivations, you saved the most important person in my world. And you," I said quietly, "have been taking care of everyone except yourself." "What do you mean? When do you rest, Charlotte? When do you do something just because it makes you happy?" She looked confused by the question. "I don't understand. What do you do for fun? What are your hobbies? What makes you smile?" The garden, I suppose. I've always loved gardening." "What else?" Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. "I used to paint," she said finally. "Before Mom got sick, before I had to work so much. I loved watercolors, landscapes, flowers, birds." "Do you still have your supplies?" "They're in storage. I sold most of my things when I moved here, but I couldn't bear to part with the paints and brushes." She looked almost embarrassed. "It's silly, really. I was never very good. I'd love to see your paintings sometime." "Why?" The simple question caught me off guard. Why did I want to see her paintings? Why was I suddenly desperate to know everything about this woman I'd been living with for 6 months? "Because," I said slowly, "I'm starting to realize that I married a stranger, and I'd like to change that." That afternoon, I did something that shocked my entire office. I left at 3 o'clock. I found Charlotte in the garden, her hands covered in dirt, a small smile on her face as she tended to a patch of new roses. She was wearing jeans and an old t-shirt, her hair in a messy ponytail, and she looked more beautiful than I'd ever seen her. "You're home early," she said, looking up from the flowers. "I brought you something." I held out a large bag from Richardson's Art Supply, the most expensive art store in the city. Charlotte's eyes widened. "What is this?" "Open it." With trembling hands, she pulled out professional-grade watercolor paints, brushes, and paper. "Robert, this is too much. These supplies cost hundreds of dollars. You're my wife. If you want to paint, you should have the best supplies available." "But why? Why would you do this?" I knelt beside her in the garden, not caring about the dirt on my expensive suit. "Because this morning I realized that in 6 months of marriage, I've never once asked what would make you happy. And when you told me about painting, your whole face lit up." I paused. "I want to see that light in your eyes more often." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. "I don't understand what's changed. I'm starting to understand what I've been missing." We spent the rest of the afternoon in the garden. I watched her paint the roses she'd been tending, marveling at the way she could capture not just their appearance but their essence on paper. She was talented, far more talented than she'd claimed. "You're incredible at this," I said, watching her add delicate shadows to a pink bloom. "It's just a hobby." "No, it's not. It's a gift." I moved closer to her on the garden bench. "Charlotte, why did you stop painting?" "No time, no money for supplies, no space." She shrugged. "When you're working 3 jobs to pay medical bills, art becomes a luxury you can't afford. You have time now, and space, and I'll make sure you never lack for supplies again." She set down her brush and looked at me. "Robert, what's happening between us? This morning you barely knew how I liked my coffee, and now you're buying me art supplies and encouraging my dreams. I don't understand." I took a deep breath. Yesterday, I realized that I've been so focused on keeping our arrangement businesslike that I forgot you're a person with dreams and passions and talents. I forgot that just because our marriage started as a contract doesn't mean it has to stay that way. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe we could try being friends. Real friends. And maybe... I hesitated, not sure how far to push. Maybe something more if you're open to it. Charlotte stared at me for a long moment. And what happens in 18 months when the contract ends? I don't know, I admitted. But I'd like to find out together. That evening, Peterson came to dinner, a weekly tradition I'd never paid much attention to before. But tonight, watching him talk to Charlotte, seeing the way his eyes followed her every movement, I felt a jealousy so sharp it nearly took my breath away. "Charlotte, you look radiant tonight," Peterson said, taking her hand as he greeted her. "There's something different about you." "Robert bought me art supplies," she said, and I noticed she didn't pull her hand away from his immediately. "I spent the afternoon painting in the garden." "How wonderful. I'd love to see your work sometime." "She's incredibly talented," I interjected, perhaps too quickly. "A real artist." Peterson's eyes flicked to me, and I saw a flash of something. Surprise, perhaps, or suspicion. "That's quite a change from your usual attitude toward the arts, Robert," he said. "Didn't you once say that art was an impractical waste of time and money?" Charlotte looked at me with surprise. "You said that?" "People change," I said firmly, meeting Peterson's gaze. "Priorities evolve." "Indeed they do," Peterson said quietly, but his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. As dinner progressed, I found myself competing for Charlotte's attention in ways I'd never done before. When Peterson complimented her dress, I mentioned how beautiful she looked in the garden that afternoon. When he asked about her mother's health, I showed that I now knew details about Margaret Davis that I'd never bothered to learn before. "Robert seems very attentive tonight," Peterson observed when Charlotte excused herself to check on dessert. "She's my wife, Peterson. I should be attentive." "Since when?" The question was blunt, direct. "6 months ago, you told me this marriage was purely business. You said you specifically chose someone who wouldn't expect romantic attention. Maybe I was wrong. Or maybe," Peterson said, his voice low, "you've noticed that someone else sees her value." Our eyes met across the table, and I realized that my brother knew I'd overheard his confession in the garden. The challenge in his gaze was unmistakable. "She's my wife," I repeated. "On paper," Peterson replied. "But when has that ever mattered to you before?" "It matters now." "Why? What's changed?" I leaned forward. "I've changed, Peterson. And I'm not giving up the best thing that's ever happened to me just because I was too blind to see it before." "And what if she's happier with someone who saw her value from the beginning?" The question hung between us like a gauntlet thrown down. For the first time in our lives, Peterson and I were truly at odds over something that mattered. "Then she'll choose," I said finally. "But I'm going to fight for her." "So am I," Peterson replied quietly. When Charlotte returned with dessert, the tension in the room was palpable. She looked between Peterson and me with confusion. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's perfect," I said, standing to pull out her chair, a gesture I'd never made before. "Absolutely perfect." But as I watched Peterson's eyes follow Charlotte's every movement for the rest of the evening, I knew that our battle for her heart had officially begun. And I was 18 months behind. 3 weeks had passed since my awakening, and I was failing miserably. Despite my best efforts to woo my own wife, Charlotte remained politely distant, treating my sudden attention with the same careful courtesy she'd always shown. Meanwhile, Peterson's visits to our home had become increasingly frequent and increasingly intimate. I found them together again that Thursday afternoon, sitting by the fountain in our back garden. Charlotte was painting while Peterson read aloud from a book of poetry. The scene was so naturally romantic it made my chest ache with jealousy. "That's beautiful, Charlotte," Peterson said, looking over her shoulder at the watercolor of white lilies. "You've captured something I've never noticed before, The way the light catches the edges of the petals. You really think so? Charlotte's face lit up with pleasure at his praise. I think you see beauty in places most people overlook. It's a gift. I stepped back from the window, feeling like an intruder in my own home. For 3 weeks, I'd been trying to win Charlotte's affection, but every gesture felt forced, every conversation stilted. Meanwhile, Peterson's connection with her seemed as natural as breathing. My phone buzzed. Scarlett Thompson, my assistant, was requesting a meeting about the Henderson merger, the same merger I'd been neglecting while trying to figure out how to romance my wife. Mr. Richardson? Scarlett knocked on my office door. Do you have a moment? Scarlett was 29, brilliant and ambitious. She'd been my assistant for 2 years, and I'd always appreciated her efficiency and discretion. Today, however, there was something different in her demeanor, a calculated smile that put me on edge. The Henderson merger documents need your review, she said, setting a thick folder on my desk. Also, I couldn't help but notice that Dr. Peterson has been spending a lot of time here lately. I looked up sharply. That's hardly unusual. He's my brother. Of course. Scarlett perched on the edge of my desk, a familiarity I'd never encouraged. It's just that people are beginning to talk. What people? Your social circle, the board members' wives. There was quite a bit of gossip at the Morrison Charity Gala last week about how attentive Dr. Peterson has been to Mrs. Richardson. A chill ran down my spine. What exactly are they saying? Oh, nothing too specific. Just observations about how he looks at her, how she smiles when he's around. Some are wondering if perhaps your marriage isn't as solid as it appears. Scarlett's voice was honey-sweet, but there was venom underneath. Of course, I told everyone that Mrs. Richardson is far too principled to encourage such attention, and you're far too confident to worry about a little harmless admiration. Scarlett, what are you really saying? She stood and walked to the window, looking out at Charlotte and Peterson. I'm saying that if your wife were to be caught in a compromising position with your brother, it would void your father's will entirely. The morality clause is quite specific about adultery. My blood turned to ice. Are you threatening me? Threatening? Scarlett turned with an expression of mock innocence. I'm trying to help you, Robert. You're so busy playing the devoted husband lately that you're missing what's happening right under your nose. And what exactly is happening? Your brother is in love with your wife. Your wife, despite her admirable attempts at propriety, is beginning to care for him. And if this continues, she shrugged delicately. Well, let's just say that some people might find it very convenient if photographic evidence of an affair happened to surface. Get out. My voice was deadly quiet. Robert, I'm only trying to... Get out of my office. Get out of my house. You're fired. Scarlett's mask finally slipped, revealing the calculating woman underneath. You're making a mistake, Robert. I could have helped you keep everything. Your company, your fortune, your precious reputation. Instead, you're choosing to protect a woman who's already chosen another man. The only mistake I made was trusting you. Security will escort you out. After Scarlett left, I sat alone in my office, her words echoing in my mind. Was she right? Was I fighting a battle I'd already lost? That evening, I found Charlotte in the art room I'd had set up for her in the East Wing. She was working on a large canvas, a landscape of the garden with figures in the distance that looked suspiciously like her and Peterson. It's beautiful, I said softly. She startled, nearly dropping her brush. Robert, I didn't hear you come in. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. I moved closer to examine the painting. Is that you and Peterson in the garden? Charlotte's cheeks flushed. It's just a composition. The figures could be anyone. Could they? We stood in silence for a moment, the question hanging between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we should cross. Charlotte, I said finally, can I ask you something? And will you give me an honest answer? Of course. If you hadn't needed the money for your mother's treatment, if we'd met under different circumstances, would you have given me a chance? She set down her brush and turned to face me fully. Robert, why are you asking me this? Because I need to know if what I'm feeling is real, or if I'm just being possessive over something I think I own. What you're feeling. I took a deep breath. I'm falling in love with you, Charlotte. I know that sounds impossible. I know I've given you no reason to believe me. But it's true. These past 3 weeks, getting to know you, seeing your kindness and your talent and your strength, I'm falling in love with my own wife, and I don't know what to do about it. Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. Robert, I know I have no right to ask this. I know I treated you terribly for 6 months. I know Peterson has been everything I should have been from the beginning. But I'm asking anyway. Is there any chance you could feel something for me? Something real? You want honesty? Charlotte's voice was barely a whisper. Please. 3 weeks ago, if you'd told me you were falling in love with me, I would have laughed. You were cold, distant, completely uninterested in anything about me except my ability to fulfill a contract. My heart sank. And now I see glimpses of a man I could have fallen in love with. The man who buys art supplies because he wants to see me happy. The man who asks about my mother and actually listens to the answers. The man who looks at me like I'm more than just a business arrangement. But I also see Peterson, who saw all of those things in me from the very beginning, who never needed to learn to care about me because caring came naturally to him. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Robert, I'm so confused. I don't know what's real anymore. I stepped closer, gently wiping the tears from her face. Then let me show you what's real. Before I could lose my nerve, I leaned down and kissed her. It was our first real kiss. Soft, tentative, full of 6 months of suppressed longing and 3 weeks of desperate hope. When we broke apart, Charlotte was breathless. Robert, that's real, I whispered. Whatever else happens, whatever you decide, that's real. The next morning, I woke to find Charlotte gone. Her bed hadn't been slept in, and her car was missing from the garage. Panic seized me until I found a note on the kitchen counter. Robert, I've gone to visit my mother. I need time to think, to figure out what I really feel and what I really want. I'm sorry for running away, but I can't make this decision with both you and Peterson watching my every move. I'll be back in 3 days. Please don't follow me. Charlotte. I crumpled the note in my fist, then smoothed it out again. 3 days. She needed 3 days to decide between the husband who'd taken 6 months to notice her and the brother-in-law who'd loved her from the first moment. She's gone? Peterson appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in his pajamas. He must have stayed the night again, something that had become increasingly common. She went to see her mother. Needs time to think. Peterson poured himself coffee with the familiarity of someone who belonged here. About what? About us. About what she wants. And what do you think she'll decide? I looked at my brother. Really looked at him. He was everything I wasn't. Warm, intuitive, naturally caring. He was also genuinely in love with Charlotte in a way that had nothing to do with pride or possession. I think, I said slowly, that she'll choose the man who loved her first, the man who saw her value before anyone told him to look. Peterson set down his cup. Robert, if she chooses me, if she chooses you, you'd better spend every day of your life making sure she knows how lucky you are to have her. And if she chooses you, then I'll spend every day proving I was worth choosing. We stood in my kitchen, our kitchen, 2 brothers who had never competed for anything important before, waiting for a woman to decide which of us deserved her love. 3 days had never felt so long. On the second day, I did something I'd never done before. I drove to the hospital where Charlotte worked and spoke to her colleagues. I wanted to understand who she was when she wasn't Mrs. Robert Richardson. Charlotte Davis. Dr. Martinez, the head of the cardiac unit, smiled immediately. She's one of our best nurses. Patients ask for her specifically. What makes her so special? She sees people, you know, not just patients or conditions, but people. I've seen her spend her break time reading to an elderly patient with no family. I've watched her stay late to teach a scared young mother how to care for her premature baby. He paused, Your wife has a gift for making people feel seen and valued." The irony wasn't lost on me. Charlotte made everyone feel seen and valued, except she'd never felt that way in her own home. On the third day, Peterson and I both waited. He paced the living room while I stood by the window, watching for headlights. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing left to say. When Charlotte's car finally pulled into the driveway at sunset, my heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the moment that would define the rest of all our lives. She walked into the house slowly, like someone carrying a great weight. Peterson and I both stood as she entered the living room. "I've made my decision," she said simply. The words hung in the air like a verdict. "But first, I need to tell you both something I realized while I was gone." She looked between us, her green eyes clear and certain. "I've been living my entire adult life for other people, for my mother, for my patients, for this marriage contract. I've never once asked myself what I want, what would make me happy." "Charlotte," Peterson started, but she held up a hand. "I've decided," she continued, "that I can't choose between you. Not yet. Because I don't know who I am when I'm not taking care of someone else or fulfilling someone else's expectations." My stomach dropped. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I need time to figure out who Charlotte is when she's not trying to save her mother, or be the perfect contract wife, or navigate between two brothers who both deserve better than a woman who doesn't know her own heart." "How much time?" Peterson asked quietly. "I don't know. Maybe weeks. Maybe months. But I need both of you to stop competing for me like I'm a prize to be won. If either of you really loves me, you'll give me the space to become someone worth loving." I felt like I'd been punched. "Charlotte, you are worth loving. You've always been worth loving." "Then prove it," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Both of you. Prove it by letting me go." 6 weeks. 6 weeks since Charlotte had walked out of our lives, leaving Peterson and me to navigate the strange, hollow silence of a house that had never felt emptier. 6 weeks of waiting for phone calls that never came, of checking her social media for signs of life, of pretending that we weren't both slowly falling apart. I threw myself into work with a vengeance that surprised even my most demanding board members. The Henderson merger was completed ahead of schedule. I'd restructured 3 divisions, launched 2 new environmental initiatives, and somehow managed to increase quarterly profits by 18%. Richardson Industries had never been more successful. I had also never been more miserable. "You're going to burn out if you keep this pace," Peterson said one evening, finding me in my office at nearly midnight. He'd taken to checking on me, something that would have annoyed me before, but now felt like the only human connection I had left. "Work keeps me focused," I replied, not looking up from the contracts spread across my desk. "Work is keeping you from dealing with the fact that you miss her." I finally looked at my brother. He appeared as exhausted as I felt, dark circles under his eyes, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his doctor's coat wrinkled from too many consecutive shifts at the hospital. "You don't look like you're handling her absence any better than I am," I observed. Peterson slumped into the chair across from my desk. "I've been taking extra shifts, sleeping at the hospital more often than not. Mrs. Henderson in room 314 told me yesterday that I looked like I needed a vacation, or a good meal and 8 hours of sleep. When was the last time you went home? When was the last time you left this office?" We stared at each other, 2 successful men who'd been reduced to shadows of ourselves by the absence of one remarkable woman. "Have you heard from her?" Peterson asked finally. "No. You?" "Nothing. Not since that postcard 2 weeks ago." The postcard, a simple image of a sunrise over a lake, with Charlotte's handwriting on the back. "Learning to breathe. Thank you for understanding. C." No return address, no hint of where she was or when she might come home. "Do you think she's coming back?" Peterson's voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I admitted. "I hope so." "Even if she chooses me?" I considered the question. Really considered it. 6 weeks ago, the thought of losing Charlotte to Peterson would have filled me with competitive rage. Now, After weeks of living with the possibility that she might not choose either of us, the answer came surprisingly easily. Even if she chooses you, I confirmed. I just want her to be happy, Peterson. I want her to come home. My brother's eyes filled with tears. I never thought I'd say this, but I miss having her choose between us. At least then she was here. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. I was reviewing environmental impact reports when Mrs. Henderson, Charlotte's elderly neighbor from her old apartment building, appeared in my office lobby. "Mr. Richardson?" she said, clutching a worn purse and looking distinctly out of place among the marble and glass of my corporate headquarters. "I hope you don't mind my coming here, but I didn't know how else to reach you." "Mrs. Henderson, of course. Please sit down. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "No, thank you, dear. I came because I'm worried about Charlotte." My heart stopped. "Is she all right? Have you heard from her?" "That's just it. I haven't. And that's not like her. Charlotte calls me every week, has done so for 3 years. She always checks on my medications, asks about my garden, sends me little care packages." Mrs. Henderson's weathered hands twisted her purse strap. "But I haven't heard from her in over a month, and frankly, I'm frightened something's happened to her. She's taking some time away to think about things." "About what things?" "Mr. Richardson, Charlotte told me about your marriage arrangement. I'm one of the few people who knows the truth about why she married you." I felt heat creep up my neck. "She told you?" "Child, I've known Charlotte since she was 21 years old. I watched her work herself to the bone trying to pay for her mother's treatments. When she came to me crying because she'd found a way to save her mother but it meant entering into a loveless marriage, I told her to do whatever she had to do." Mrs. Henderson leaned forward. "But I also told her that sometimes God uses desperate circumstances to put us exactly where we need to be." "I'm not sure I understand." "Mr. Richardson, Robert, may I speak plainly?" "Please do." "Charlotte Davis is the kindest, most selfless person I've ever known. She's also never believed she deserved to be loved for herself, rather than for what she could do for others. Her father left when she was 5 because he said she was too much trouble. Her mother, bless her heart, raised Charlotte to believe that love had to be earned through service and sacrifice." My chest tightened. She's never told me any of that. Of course she hasn't. Charlotte doesn't think her feelings matter enough to burden others with them. Mrs. Henderson studied my face. But something changed in her these past few months. The last time I saw her, she was different. Lighter. Like she was finally beginning to believe she might be worth loving, just for being herself. "What are you saying, Mrs. Henderson?" "I'm saying that girl didn't run away because she doesn't know what she wants. She ran away because she's terrified that what she wants might actually be possible, and she doesn't know how to handle that possibility. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in 6 weeks. I called Charlotte's mother. "Robert!" Margaret Davis's voice was warm and welcoming, despite everything. "How wonderful to hear from you. How are you doing, sweetheart?" The endearment caught me off guard. In all our brief conversations, Margaret had always treated me like a beloved son-in-law, never knowing that our marriage was anything other than a love story. I'm struggling a bit, actually. "Margaret, have you heard from Charlotte recently?" "Oh yes, she calls me every few days. She's staying at a little bed and breakfast up in Oregon wine country, taking some art classes and doing a lot of thinking. She seems peaceful, but..." Margaret paused. "Robert, she won't tell me why she left. Only that she needed some space to figure things out. Did you two have a fight?" "Not exactly a fight. More like, we reached a crossroads, and Charlotte needed time to decide which direction to go." "That sounds like my daughter. She's always been one to think things through carefully before making important decisions." Margaret's voice softened. "Robert, can I tell you something?" "Of course." "In all the conversations I've had with Charlotte about your marriage, she's never once mentioned being happy. Content, grateful, secure, yes, but never happy. Until these past few months. What changed? You tell me. But starting about 8 weeks ago, Charlotte began talking about you differently. Instead of saying, Robert provided this, or Robert arranged that, she started saying things like, Robert surprised me with art supplies, or Robert asked about my dreams. She started talking about you like you were a person she cared about, rather than just someone she was grateful to. My throat felt tight. And now she talks about missing home, but she's afraid to come back. She won't tell me why, but a mother knows. That girl is scared of something. Scared of what? Of hoping for too much, I think. Of believing she might actually get the kind of love she's always dreamed of, but never thought she deserved. That evening, Peterson and I sat in Charlotte's art room, surrounded by the paintings she'd left behind. Landscapes, portraits, still lifes, all of them beautiful, all of them infused with a light and warmth that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. She's incredibly talented, Peterson said, studying a watercolor of the fountain where we'd so often found them together. She is. I should have told her that more often. We both should have told her a lot of things more often. I picked up a small canvas I'd never noticed before, a painting of 2 figures in the distance, walking away from each other on diverging paths. In the foreground, a 3rd figure sat alone, watching them go. Peterson, I said slowly, what if we've been approaching this all wrong? What do you mean? What if this isn't about choosing between us? What if this is about Charlotte learning to choose herself? Peterson set down the painting he'd been examining. I don't follow. Mrs. Henderson came to see me today. She told me that Charlotte has never believed she deserved to be loved for who she is, rather than for what she could do for others. And her mother said she's afraid to hope for too much. So, maybe Charlotte didn't leave because she can't decide between us. Maybe she left because she's never made a decision based on what she wants rather than what others need from her. I looked around the room, at all the art she'd created in the brief time I'd encouraged her creativity. Maybe she needs to learn who she is when she's not taking care of someone else. Peterson was quiet for a long moment. And what do we do with that? We prove that we love her enough to let her figure it out. Without pressure, without competition, without making her choice about us instead of about her. You're suggesting we stop fighting for her? I'm suggesting we start fighting for her differently. Instead of trying to win her, we show her that she's worth waiting for, that whatever she decides, whoever she becomes during this time away, we'll still be here. Peterson smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in weeks. You know, for a ruthless businessman, you occasionally have good ideas. Don't let it go to your head. We spent the rest of the evening in that art room, not competing or arguing, but simply being brothers again. And for the first time since Charlotte had left, I felt something other than desperation. I felt hope. 2 days later, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. I called my board of directors and announced that I was taking a sabbatical. A sabbatical? Harold Morrison, the chairman, looked stunned. Robert, you've never taken more than 3 consecutive days off in the 10 years I've known you. Exactly my point. I've been so focused on building this company that I've forgotten how to live my life. I need time to remember. How long? Asked Patricia Blackwood. I don't know. Could be weeks, could be months. But Richardson Industries is strong enough to function without me for a while, and I need to figure out who Robert Richardson is when he's not behind this desk. That afternoon, I drove to the hospital and found Peterson in the break room between surgeries. I'm taking a sabbatical, I announced. What now? I'm stepping away from Richardson Industries for a while. Maybe traveling, maybe learning something new. I don't know yet. Peterson stared at me. Robert, what's brought this on? Charlotte was right. I don't know who I am when I'm not being CEO. And if I want to be the kind of man worth choosing, I need to figure that out. And you're starting where? I pulled out a brochure I'd picked up that morning. Art classes. The same program Charlotte's taking in Oregon wine country. Peterson's eyes widened. You're going to follow her? No, I'm going to take a different class, in a different location. I'm going to learn about something she loves, not to impress her, but to understand what moves her, to understand what it means to create something beautiful, just for the joy of creating it. Robert, that's crazy? Actually, I was going to say it's the most romantic thing I've ever heard. We looked at each other, and I realized something had shifted between us. We were no longer competitors fighting for the same prize. We were two men who loved the same woman, both trying to become worthy of her love in our own ways. Peterson, I said finally, regardless of what Charlotte decides when she comes home, I want you to know that I'm proud to be your brother. Even if she chooses me, especially if she chooses you, because if she does, it'll mean she's choosing the man who saw her value first, who loved her without reservation, who never needed to learn how to cherish her because it came naturally. I stood up. And if she chooses me, it'll be because I finally learned to be the man she deserved from the beginning. As I left the hospital that day, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. For the first time since Charlotte had walked out of our lives, I wasn't focused on winning her back. I was focused on becoming someone worth coming back to. 3 months. That's how long I'd been in Tuscany, learning to paint with hands that had only ever known how to sign contracts and shake hands in boardrooms. Your brushwork is improving, Roberto, said Sophia, my art instructor, examining my latest attempt at capturing the golden light of a Tuscan sunset. But you're still thinking too much. Art comes from the heart, not the mind. I set down my brush and looked at the canvas. It was technically proficient. The colors were right, the composition balanced, but it lacked something essential: life, emotion, the spark that made Charlotte's painting so extraordinary. Sophia, how do you paint with your heart instead of your head? She smiled, her weathered face crinkling with amusement. You stop trying to control the outcome and start feeling the moment. What makes you happy, Roberto? What breaks your heart? What makes you feel alive? The answer came immediately: Charlotte. Everything about her, her laugh, her gentleness, the way she could transform a dying garden into something beautiful, the way she'd looked when I finally kissed her, the way she'd looked when she walked away. I picked up my brush and began again, this time not thinking about technique or composition, but about the way Charlotte's hair caught the light when she painted in our garden, about the joy in her eyes when she discovered something beautiful, about the courage it had taken for her to leave everything familiar to find herself. This time, when I stepped back from the canvas, Sophia nodded approvingly. Now you're painting with your heart. That evening, I called Peterson from my small apartment overlooking the vineyard. How's the art going? He asked immediately. Slowly, painfully, but I'm learning. I looked out at the sunset that had inspired my painting. How are things at home? Quiet, empty. But I've been thinking about what you said before you left, about becoming someone worth coming back to. And I've been volunteering at the free clinic downtown, working with patients who can't afford proper medical care. It's reminded me why I became a doctor in the first place. I smiled. To help people, not just to have a successful practice. Exactly. I'd gotten so caught up in being a successful physician that I'd forgotten what it felt like to be a healer. Peterson paused. Robert, I need to tell you something. I heard from Charlotte. My heart stopped. When? How is she? Is she coming home? Yesterday. She sent me a letter. An actual handwritten letter. She's in Northern California now, working at an art therapy program for children with cancer. Art therapy? She's using her nursing background and her artistic training to help kids express their feelings about their illness through painting and drawing. The letter was... God, Robert, it was beautiful. She sounded more like herself than I'd ever heard her. I felt a complex mix of pride, longing, and something that might have been peace. She's found her calling. It sounds like it. But Robert, she also said something else. She said she's ready to come home. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. When? Next week. She wants to meet with both of us together. She said she has things to say that we both need to hear. I closed my eyes, feeling 3 months of preparation and growth crystallize into this moment. Peterson, whatever she decides, I know. We'll handle it with grace. Both of us. I flew back to Portland the next day, my heart hammering the entire 12-hour journey. Peterson met me at the airport, and for a moment we just stood there, two brothers who had somehow found their way back to each other through loving the same woman. You look different, he observed as we walked to his car. I feel different. 3 months of learning to fail at something every day changes a man. Fail? I ruined more canvases than I can count. But Sophia taught me that failure is just another word for learning. That you can't create something beautiful without being willing to risk creating something awful first. Peterson smiled. That sounds like a metaphor for relationships. Everything sounds like a metaphor for relationships when you're in love with someone who's not there. The house felt strange when I walked through the front door. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. But somehow it felt different. Smaller, perhaps, or just incomplete without Charlotte's presence. I walked through the rooms, noting the small changes Peterson had made during my absence. Fresh flowers in the kitchen, books left open on the reading table, signs of life in a house that had felt like a mausoleum when Charlotte left. She's supposed to arrive tomorrow afternoon, Peterson said, following me into Charlotte's art room. She asked us to meet her here. I looked around the space that had become a shrine to the woman we both loved. Her paintings still hung on the walls, her supplies still organized exactly as she'd left them. But there was something new, an easel in the corner with a canvas covered by a sheet. What's that? I don't know. It was here when I came to check on the house last week. I didn't want to look without you. Together, we approached the covered canvas. Peterson looked at me questioningly, and I nodded. He pulled away the sheet. It was a painting of our garden, but not as it appeared in any single moment. Instead, it seemed to capture the garden's evolution through time, spring blooms giving way to summer growth, autumn leaves falling onto winter's bare branches, and then spring returning again. In the center, barely visible unless you looked closely, were 3 figures. A woman kneeling among the flowers, and 2 men in the distance, watching her with obvious love. But what took my breath away was the light. The entire painting seemed to glow with hope, with the promise of renewal, with the beauty of things that grow and change and become more than they were before. She painted this after she left, Peterson said quietly. How do you know? Look at the signature. In the bottom right corner, in Charlotte's careful script, were the words, Charlotte Davis Richardson, finding home. She signed it with both names, I whispered. She found a way to be both people, Peterson said. The woman she was and the woman she became. That night, neither of us slept. We sat in the kitchen, drinking coffee and talking until dawn, really talking, perhaps for the first time in our adult lives, about our childhood, about our father, about the ways we'd both tried to earn love through achievement, instead of simply being worthy of it. I'm scared, Peterson admitted as the sun began to rise. Of what she'll choose. Of what she won't choose. What if all this time apart has made her realize she doesn't want either of us? What if she's found herself and decided that herself is enough? I considered this. Then we'll be happy for her, and we'll be grateful that we learned to be better men because of loving her. Even if it means being better men alone. Even then. At exactly 3 o'clock that afternoon, Charlotte's car pulled into our driveway. Peterson and I stood in the art room, both dressed in our best clothes, both trying to appear calm while our hearts hammered against our ribs. She walked in wearing a simple sundress I'd never seen before, her hair longer than when she'd left, her skin golden from months of California sunshine. But it was her eyes that made me catch my breath. They were clear, peaceful, certain in a way I'd never seen before. Hello, she said simply, looking between us with a smile that seemed to hold all the warmth in the world. Charlotte. Peterson stepped forward first, and she allowed him to hug her, a brief, careful embrace that spoke of continued affection and respect. Then she turned to me, and I saw something in her expression that made hope bloom in my chest like one of her rescued flowers. "Robert," she said, and there was something different in the way she said my name. Something that sounded like coming home. "You look beautiful," I said, because it was true, and because I'd learned that truth was the only foundation for anything real. "I feel beautiful," she replied. "I feel like myself for the first time in my life." She walked to the center of the room, equidistant from both of us, and I realized this was it. The moment we'd all been waiting for, dreading, hoping for. "I asked you both to meet me here because this room represents something important to me. It's where I learned that I could create something beautiful, not because someone needed me to, but because I wanted to. It's where I started to believe that my desires mattered as much as everyone else's needs." She paused, looking around at her paintings. "These past 3 months have been the hardest and the most wonderful of my life. I learned to be alone without being lonely. I learned to make decisions based on what felt right instead of what seemed practical. I learned that I have value beyond what I can do for other people." "Charlotte," Peterson said gently, "we never doubted your value." "I know, but I did. And I needed to learn not to doubt it myself before I could trust anyone else's feelings about me." She walked to her easel and picked up a small canvas I hadn't noticed before. A self-portrait, painted with the same glowing light that had illuminated her garden painting. "I painted this last week," she said. "It's the first time I've ever painted myself and liked what I saw. Not because I look different, but because I finally saw what you both have been trying to tell me, that I'm enough. Exactly as I am." Tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling. "I came back because I realized something. Love isn't about choosing between two wonderful men who both deserve happiness. Love is about choosing to be brave enough to accept happiness when it's offered." She set down the painting and turned to face us both. "Peterson, you saw me when I felt invisible. You loved me when I didn't know how to love myself. You showed me what it felt like to be cherished, and that gift changed my life forever." Peterson's face crumpled with emotion. "Charlotte, but Robert," she continued, turning to me, "you showed me something even more powerful. You showed me that people can change, that love can transform us, that it's never too late to become the person we're meant to be. You chose to see me differently, and in doing so, you taught me to see myself differently." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they could both hear it. "I love you both," she said simply, "but I'm in love with only one of you." The silence in the room was deafening. "Robert," she said, and my world tilted on its axis. "I'm in love with you. Not because you're my husband on paper, not because you bought me art supplies or because you learned to paint. I'm in love with you because you had the courage to become a different man, and because that man is someone I want to build a real life with." I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, could only stare at this extraordinary woman who had somehow chosen me despite every reason she had not to. "But Peterson," she turned to my brother, "I need you to know that my choice isn't a rejection of you. It's an acceptance of what my heart has been trying to tell me since the moment Robert first asked how I like my coffee. You'll always be precious to me. You'll always be the man who taught me I was worth loving." Peterson was crying openly now, but he was also smiling. "Charlotte, all I ever wanted was for you to be happy. If Robert makes you happy..." "He does," she said firmly. "He makes me happy in ways I never thought possible." She walked toward me then, closing the distance between us with steps that felt like a lifetime of waiting finally coming to an end. "Robert Richardson," she said, reaching up to cup my face in her hands. "Would you like to start over? For real this time?" "Charlotte Davis Richardson," I said, my voice breaking on her name. I would like nothing more. When I kissed her this time, it wasn't with desperation or possession or the fear of losing her. I kissed her with gratitude, with wonder, with the absolute certainty that I was exactly where I belonged. Behind us, Peterson cleared his throat softly. "Well," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice, "I guess I should start planning a real wedding." Charlotte broke our kiss long enough to laugh, the sound filling the room like music. "Actually," she said, "I was thinking something small, just family, maybe in the garden." "Our garden," I corrected, pulling her close again. "Our garden," she agreed. And in that moment, surrounded by the art she'd created and the love we'd all fought for and found, I finally understood what it meant to be truly wealthy. It had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the woman in my arms. 6 months later, I stood at the altar in our garden, surrounded by white roses and the soft afternoon light that Charlotte loved to paint, watching my wife walk toward me for the second time. But this time, everything was different. This time, she was choosing me. Charlotte moved down the aisle created by the flower beds she'd rescued and restored, wearing a simple ivory dress that she'd designed herself. Her hair was adorned with flowers from our garden, flowers that had been dying when she first arrived, but now bloomed in glorious abundance under her care. Margaret Davis, fully recovered and radiant with health, walked beside her daughter with tears of joy streaming down her face. Behind them, Mrs. Henderson beamed with the satisfaction of someone who had known all along how this story would end. Peterson stood beside me as my best man, his hand on my shoulder, his presence a reminder that love multiplied rather than divided. The past 6 months had transformed our relationship from rivalry to brotherhood in the truest sense. "You ready for this?" he whispered as Charlotte approached. "I've been ready for this my entire life," I whispered back. I just didn't know it until I met her. When Charlotte reached the altar, she handed her bouquet to Sarah Chen, her maid of honor, and turned to face me with eyes that held all the light in the world. "Dearly beloved," began Father Michael, the priest who had watched Charlotte grow up in her mother's parish. "We are gathered here today not to witness the beginning of Robert and Charlotte's marriage, but to celebrate its transformation from contract to covenant, from arrangement to authentic love." I had asked him to acknowledge our unconventional beginning. We had decided that our real marriage would start with truth, not pretense. "Robert and Charlotte have already learned one of marriage's most important lessons," Father Michael continued, "that love is not a feeling that happens to us, but a choice we make every day. They have chosen each other not once, but twice, first in desperation, and now in joy. Robert," Father Michael nodded to me, "you may speak your vows." I took Charlotte's hands in mine. These hands that had saved dying plants and painted beauty into the world and somehow found their way to my heart. "Charlotte," I began, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. "6 months ago, you accused me of not knowing who I was when I wasn't being CEO. You were right. I had built my entire identity around control, achievement, and emotional distance." I saw tears gathering in her eyes, but her smile never wavered. "You taught me that the strongest thing a man can do is allow himself to be changed by love. You showed me that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the only path to real strength. You transformed me from a man who bought solutions to a man who cultivates beauty." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, wrapped canvas, something I'd painted during our engagement, working in the art studio we now shared. "This is my promise to you," I said, unwrapping the small painting. It showed 2 figures in a garden, but unlike Charlotte's painting where the figures were distant, these 2 were close together, their hands intertwined, growing something beautiful together. "I promise to keep growing with you, to keep learning from you, to keep choosing you every day for the rest of my life. I promise to water the garden of our love with attention, patience, and daily acts of devotion. And I promise that you will never again doubt your worth, because I will spend every day showing you how precious you are." Charlotte was crying openly now, but her voice was strong when she spoke her own vows. "Robert, when I married you the first time, I thought love was something that happened to other people. I thought I was too practical, too broken, too ordinary to inspire the kind of love I'd dreamed about." She squeezed my hands tighter. "You proved me wrong. Not by changing who you were to please me, but by becoming who you were always meant to be. You showed me that transformation is possible, that people can grow beyond their fears, that love can make us better without making us different. She reached up and touched my face gently. I promise to keep seeing you. Not the man you were, not the man you think you should be, but the man you are right now, in this moment, choosing love over fear. I promise to keep growing alongside you, to keep creating beauty with you, to keep choosing courage over comfort. And I promise to love you not just in the easy moments, but especially in the moments when love is a choice rather than a feeling. Father Michael smiled as we exchanged rings. New rings, engraved with coordinates marking the exact spot in our garden where Robert had first told me he was falling in love with me. By the power vested in me by God and the state of Oregon, I now pronounce you husband and wife, not for the first time, but for the truest time. Robert, you may kiss your bride. When our lips met, the small gathering erupted in applause and cheers. But all I could hear was the beating of Charlotte's heart against mine. All I could feel was the warmth of her hands in mine. All I could see was the future stretching out before us like a blank canvas waiting to be filled with beauty. The reception was exactly what Charlotte had wanted, intimate, joyful, and held entirely in our garden. Peterson had arranged for a string quartet, Margaret had insisted on making the cake herself, and Mrs. Henderson had appointed herself as unofficial photographer, capturing every moment with the enthusiasm of someone who had waited years to see Charlotte truly happy. "Speech! Speech!" called out Dr. Martinez, Charlotte's colleague from the hospital, who had become like family to us over the past months. I stood, pulling Charlotte up beside me, and looked out at the faces of the people who had supported us through our unconventional journey to love. "A year ago," I began, "if someone had told me that the best thing that ever happened to me would start with a business transaction, I would have had them committed for psychiatric evaluation." Laughter rippled through the crowd. But Charlotte taught me that love doesn't care about how it begins. It only cares about how it grows. She taught me that the most successful merger isn't between companies, but between hearts that choose to become better together than they ever were apart. I turned to Charlotte, whose face was glowing with happiness. To my wife, my partner, my inspiration. Thank you for teaching me that the heart I thought I didn't have was just waiting for the right person to help me find it. As the evening wound down and our guests began to leave, Peterson approached us where we stood by the fountain, still in our wedding clothes, still unable to stop smiling. "I have something for you," he said, holding out an envelope. "A wedding gift." "Peterson, you've already given us so much," Charlotte protested. "Just open it." Inside the envelope were 2 airline tickets to Tuscany, with a note in Peterson's familiar handwriting. "For the artist and the man who learned to paint with his heart. May you create beautiful things together." "Peterson," I began, but he held up a hand. "I've also arranged for someone to take care of the garden while you're gone. And before you ask, no, it's not a sacrifice. It's a gift. To myself as much as to you." "What do you mean?" Charlotte asked. Peterson smiled, and for the first time since his confession of love months ago, his smile held no sadness, only genuine joy. "I've met someone, Dr. Sarah Kim, the new pediatric surgeon at the hospital. She's brilliant, kind, and she thinks my poetry is delightfully terrible. Her words, not mine." Charlotte squealed with delight, throwing her arms around Peterson. "Tell us everything." "Later," Peterson laughed. "Tonight is about you two. But I wanted you to know that love really does multiply rather than divide. You taught me that, both of you." 2 weeks later, Charlotte and I stood in the same Tuscan vineyard where I had learned to paint. But this time, we were painting together. She worked on a landscape of the rolling hills, while I attempted a portrait of her as she worked, trying to capture the concentration on her face, the way the afternoon light turned her hair to gold. "You're staring," she said, without looking up from her canvas. "I'm studying my subject." "Is that what you call it?" "I call it falling more in love with my wife every day." She finally looked up, paintbrush still poised in her hand. "Robert Richardson, are you flirting with me?" "Mrs. Richardson, I'm going to flirt with you for the rest of our lives." She set down her brush and moved to look at my portrait of her. "This is beautiful," she said softly. "But you painted me more beautiful than I really am." "No," I said, wrapping my arms around her from behind. "I painted you exactly as I see you, as I've always seen you, once I learned how to look." That evening, we sat on the terrace of our little rental cottage, sharing a bottle of local wine and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd met differently?" Charlotte asked, her head resting on my shoulder. "Every day," I admitted, "and every day I come to the same conclusion. Which is that we met exactly when we were supposed to, exactly how we were supposed to. You needed to learn that you were worth fighting for. I needed to learn how to fight for something other than profit. We both needed to discover that love isn't something you earn or achieve. It's something you choose and cultivate." Charlotte was quiet for a moment. "I have something to tell you," she said finally. "What's that?" "I'm thinking about writing a book. About art therapy, about using creativity to heal trauma. The work I did in California with the children showed me that art can do more than create beauty. It can restore hope." "Charlotte, that's incredible. You should absolutely write that book." "You think so?" "I think you have a gift for healing that the world needs to know about. I think you've spent your whole life helping others find their strength, and now it's time to help them find their voice." She turned to look at me, her eyes bright with excitement and possibility. "Would you help me? I know you're busy getting back into the rhythm at Richardson Industries." "Charlotte," I interrupted, "Richardson Industries will always be there, but the chance to support my wife in changing the world, that's the opportunity of a lifetime." 6 months later, we stood in a bookstore in downtown Portland, watching Charlotte sign copies of Painting Through Pain, an art therapy journey. The book had already been featured in several medical journals, and art therapy programs across the country were requesting Charlotte as a consultant. "I'm so proud of you," I whispered in her ear, as she handed a signed copy to an elderly woman who had told her the book helped her process her husband's death. "We did this together," Charlotte replied. "I couldn't have written it without your encouragement, your editing, your belief in me. All I did was see what was already there." That night we returned to our garden, to the fountain where so much of our story had unfolded. The roses were in full bloom, the air was soft with the promise of summer, and Charlotte's latest painting, a canvas showing 2 people planting a garden together, was propped against the fountain's edge, drying in the evening air. "Any regrets?" I asked, echoing the question I'd posed so many months ago. "About falling in love with my fake husband? About choosing to build a real life with a man who used to organize his closet like a military operation? About trusting that people can change?" Charlotte pretended to consider seriously. "Not a single one. Even though I still can't make decent coffee? Especially because you still can't make decent coffee. It keeps me feeling needed." I laughed, pulling her close. "Mrs. Richardson, you are needed. Not for what you can do, but for who you are. For the rest of our lives, you are needed, wanted, and loved exactly as you are. Promise?" "I promise to keep showing you until you never doubt it again." As we stood there in our garden, surrounded by the beauty we had created together, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. We had started as strangers bound by necessity, had become enemies divided by misunderstanding, had learned to see each other as partners united by choice. But more than that, we had learned that the greatest love stories aren't about finding someone who completes you. They're about choosing someone who inspires you to complete yourself. "Robert," Charlotte said softly. "Yes, I love you. Not because you saved my mother. Not because you gave me security. Not because you learned to paint or bought me art supplies. I love you because you taught me that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be. And I love you," I replied, "because you taught me that the heart I thought I didn't have was just waiting for the right person to help me find it. In the distance, A church bell chimed midnight, marking the beginning of another day in our authentic, beautiful, chosen life together. Some love stories begin with love at first sight. Ours began with love at second chance. And that, I thought as I kissed my wife under the stars in our garden, made all the difference. The end.